So Callington Mill, quite a different project, still has heritage values, and Luke was the project architect on this, so he's going to chime in on all the stuff I forget. Again, respectfully acknowledge the first people of the nation. So Callington is in Oatlands. It is a small township. It's recognised for its intact heritage, primarily of Georgian feature and Georgian era. It's very intact still. And then the site that our client bought was located directly next to Callington Mill, the Callington Mill site. Callington Mill site is one of Tasmania's probably most well-known heritage sites. It's on state and local registers, as well as on the National Heritage Register, and is of significance. And so our clients saw an opportunity with the distillery brand, not only to connect his whisky to the heritage of the place, but also to utilise the distillery as an ongoing economic use for the mill site, which had been disused and was starting to fall into disrepair. So we did a fair bit of analysis. We're trying to put almost a 2,000 square meters of floor space in a distillery into what is a very small township, and needs a lot of sensitivity about how to do that in a way that's appropriate and still fits with the character. So we looked at the urban context. We did analysis of sight lines, views, etc. We worked out what the city grid and the scale and size of that, and the orientations. We've got two orientations, one towards High Street and one towards the dam, and so they have quite different characteristics. And then we started to fit the building in between that. The building sits within not the structural grid of the High Street, but it sort of relates more to the landscape and the qualities of an outbuilding, some of those industrial buildings that you see in the landscape. And we also saw a possibility to connect it to the mill site. So there was a relationship there which helped it. So by splitting the building into two parts, we were able to create a courtyard. There's also the building sits within the landscape sort of the township, and there is a part of the site, there's a good fall on it, which allowed us to create two stories. One which was a public access from the visitors side of things, which came through the mill, and then the second one was a service access through the back of the site and did all of the loading, unloading and whisky distillery type things. And that works on two levels. And so that the top level of the building relates to the visitor experience, and the bottom level of the building is much more about the industrial processes.
So this is the location plan. It shows the distillery in the wider context, shows the adjacency to the mill site and the connection, and the connection to the esplanade for service access. Site plan then demonstrates sorry, just go back one to the site plan. Demonstrates the relationship between the distillery and the mill, with the extension of the mill site as a working yard that intersects and breaks down the mass then of the distillery and creates an entry forecourt. The lower ground floor is embedded into the site, as Peter mentioned, and houses the industrial workings of the distillery that are connected to the service yard through large timber barn doors. And then the barrel room is connected to the left of the distillery and is accessed via a passageway, which heightens the experience of entering a cellar. The ground floor shows the main entry to the building from the forecourt through the restaurant and out to the mezzanine of the distillery. So this is part of a circulation that allows for a self-guided visitor tour through the building, which goes through the distillery and ends in the barrel room and tasting bar. So that was an important client directive from a staffing point of view, that was self-guided. The east elevation here shows the change in level across the site and how it's utilised to embed the mass of the building and create a harmonious relationship with the scale of the adjacent heritage buildings. The north elevation shows the working yard and the forecourt. This is the west and south elevations. That's okay. The precedent images of utilitarian rural sheds throughout the region. And next. This view through the site from the main street of Oatlands shows the distillery in the background. The selected brick has a soft and chalky patina that references the historic sandstone blocks of similar utilitarian buildings. The view from the mill site shows the extension of the working yard as an entry forecourt and appears as a collection of smaller buildings relating to the mill site. This is a view of the forecourt showing the large glazed facades that offer a connection into the inner workings of the distillery. A view then back from the courtyard into the mill site, with the glazing reflecting the heritage context and drawing it into the site. This is a view in the restaurant of the bar upon entering the building, and another view from the esplanade showing the service yard entry and the barn doors into the double height distillery space. And then this is the mezzanine, which can be accessed via the self-guided tour through the building, which then ends in the barrel bar and tasting bar, which offers views back up into the forecourt, and then the glazing starts to capture that heritage context and reflect it back into the site.
I think that's our last slide.
Yeah.
Thank you. Digby, did you want to start with this?
I did. Thanks for the presentation, guys. That was really useful. In your submission notes, you reference community garden or future community gardens. My question is, how does the new work relate to the grounds of the original site, and are they publicly accessible at the moment?
Not publicly accessible at the moment. This site that the building is on is heritage listed in its own right, and the initial intention was to convert the hotel at the front as part of the public space and to have the space in between as those garden spaces. That part of the project, the whole thing has taken much longer than was ever envisaged, and it was also much more expensive than I think they realised at the beginning. So that's still a sort of a future aspect of the project that's still ongoing.
Yeah, thank you.
Just a question about this. There's a section operating. Is that section a product of the site topography, or is that something that you brought into the work to clarify the the interior? That's it. Yeah. So it looks like
it's both. It's both. Yeah. So we sited the building specifically on that location to utilise that topography, and that was part. So the strategy that we brought was separating the building out into those two. That was all part of the analysis we did of how to combine it to the Callington site and have the industrial process separate.
And that is a product of both the heights of the buildings and the interiors being open and engaging from a sectional perspective when you're inside, from a visitor strategy. So that's
yes, you're right. And also, like, it needs a certain volume for the distillery operations, yet you want it to be respectful in scale to the Callington historic site.
Thank you.
Quick question: just the bricks, are they new or recycled? What's their cost?
No, they're new bricks.
They're
new bricks. I mean, we would have loved to have used recycled bricks, but that wasn't at the scale of the project. It wasn't possible. But we sourced a sandstock brick that had a similar quality.
The visitor experience you talked about, probably more on the written application, was that something directed in terms of solving something the client wanted, or did that come from the client? Because it's a bit unique, isn't it, the approach you're taking for the visitor? Yeah,
I mean, it was a little bit of both, I think. I mean, the client wanted to have a distillery that showcased their product, and they had an idea that they wanted to have people be able to walk through the distillery in the same nature as a lot of Scottish distilleries do. But it was then up to us to how to interpret that. We came up with the strategy of coming through the Callington historic site and using that as the entry forecourt and the visitor experience to connect his brand with the historic site, and then be able to separating the two types of processes so that it was a really safe experience for visitors, and then you have that sort of interaction with the working distillery without being part of it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and the copper stills, were they from the client or something? That's what it was.
So we work closely with the steel maker, the steel makers, and all of that industrial process. We mapped that out, and there was a lot of backwards and forwards workshops to how that would all fit in the building. But they're all custom made for the project in Tasmania.